Hi everyone, I'm Patrick. I'll give you a brief introduction to myself shortly. I'm a behavioural scientist. I spend my work days influencing people through adverts and websites and things, but I'm here to tell you today about how to not get influenced if you don't want to be, how to kind of protect and free your mind. Before we get into that, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in at any point. So, just a quick introduction to myself. Hello. As I said, I'm Patrick. Sometimes I ask people to call me Pat. Please don't do that, though, just between us. I don't actually like it. I prefer Patrick. But the reason I say that is, as this study found, people who use a nickname or a shorter name are seen as a bit more cheerful, which I think is where I could use some help, as you can probably already tell. And that's the kind of thing I do as an applied behavioral scientist is take academic psychology, the science of psychology, and think about how to practically use it in the real world, like optimizing your own name, but obviously more practically how to improve adverts and websites and things like that. I'm also doing something else to influence your perceptions of me at the minute. Maybe you can tell what it is. Maybe you can't, but I'm sure you have some ideas. It's actually these glasses. So people who wear glasses are perceived as more intelligent, harder working, and more honest. So well done if you're wearing glasses. As for me, I'm presumably none of these things. I don't need glasses. These actually make it harder to see, ironically. So I'll take them off. But that's just a silly but science-backed example of how quite small, subtle things in the environment can potentially have a big impact on perceptions and behaviors. And so, as I said, I'm a behavioral scientist. My shtick, my motto is that I turn minds into money. So I take that academic thinking and apply it practically for brands and campaigns. So I'm a part-time lecturer at a couple of universities. I've written some peer-reviewed papers. A recent one was on dark nudges that platforms use online to keep you hooked and scrolling for longer. And I've written a couple of books. One, Hooked, is about how to influence people through messaging. So cute dogs make adverts more effective, for example. And the other one is how not to be influenced, which of course I'll be talking a lot about today. Um, I was also the lead psychologist at Cambridge Analytica for a while, not in the political team. I didn't do politics there, just to be very, very clear on that. But I was in the consumer commercial team, figuring out how to read people from their data points and then use that to make more persuasive messaging. So I suppose the point here is that I'm really in the belly of the beast, but like the magician revealing the tricks, showing you up their sleeve, I'm going to show you how to not be influenced by this stuff if you don't want to be. And this stuff there's a lot of it, this manipulative stuff. I mean, I'm sure we all feel like someone's always trying to influence us or manipulate us in some way or get something out of us. I know I feel like that. My phone's constantly beeping or buzzing at me. Even our cars sometimes, are constantly beeping and telling us to do this and that. And supermarkets have signs saying to do this and that. It's like you can't leave the house without people trying to nudge you in some way, whether it's tech or adverts or retailers, or as I said, even your own car or people you know. Fortunately, there is a solution, but I want to start with this great example that came about for the book that I co-wrote about how not to be nudged. And I interviewed a cybersecurity expert, and he told me about this story when he once received a letter that looked like it was from his bank, but it was very, very suspicious because it had all these tells that the letter was trying to influence him and to get information out of him. It had social proof nudges and scarcity nudges and things like that. So he phoned up the bank to say someone's trying to phish me, and they said, no, no, it was us. We sent that letter. And his takeaway from that was that everyone's using these techniques so much to the point that it's quite hard to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys, so to speak. There's so much manipulation out there. Now, the reason that they work is because we are, all of us, what's known as cognitive misers. So that means we have very limited brain power for paying attention to the world, processing information, and making decisions. Now, you can't really put a number on something like this, but some people have tried. This researcher looked at sensory neurons firing in the brain every second, found there are 11 million of them that fire every second, but only 40 of them go through conscious pathways. So by his guess, we're only consciously aware of 0.0004% of everything in the world around us. We just can't consciously, carefully make decisions all the time, really. It's been estimated that even when it comes to food alone, we make 200 decisions every day. I don't know how that was counted, but you wake up and you think, should I have breakfast? What should I have? Okay, Cocoa Pops. Should I put it in a bowl or a dish? Should I add milk? What kind of milk? Should I have that second bowl or third bowl afterwards? We have all these decisions constantly. And if we thought them through carefully, we wouldn't get anything done. So we have to rely on subconscious shortcuts and emotions and what are called heuristics. These are kind of intuitions and ways of processing information without thinking too carefully. For example, we have a poll here, but I'd like to ask you, which color would you say is heavier, yellow or red? So which color is heavier, yellow or red? Just waiting for the results to come in. Now, obviously, it's nonsense, right? There's no weight to color. And yet, hopefully, as we'll see, there is a clear, intuitive answer to this question. That red is coming out clearly as the leader of people saying that red is heavier than yellow. By a wide margin, very wide margin. Now, as I said, obviously it's nonsense for one color to be heavier than another, but it's something that we feel intuitively in our gut, right? That red is heavier than yellow. And so that's an example of these kind of heuristics and intuitions that guide our decision making because we can't think about things carefully. So often we have to go with our gut. And there's a problem here, though, in that we are inundated with information and choice constantly. So it's been, again, guessed, that we are bombarded with the equivalent of 174 newspapers worth of information every day. Or at least this was back in, I think, around 2010. It's probably a lot more than that now, right? With all of the TikToks and tweets and 24-hour news cycles and everything. We are absolutely, not to mention ChatGPT, emails, things like that. We're absolutely inundated with information, yet we don't have the brain power to think it through carefully, all this choice and information. And that leaves us vulnerable to being influenced by these non-conscious heuristics, which can be used to manipulate our behavior. So I'm going to start with just a couple of implications of that from kind of a platform and a marketing perspective. So for the first one, I'm going to show you a video where there's two teams. One is wearing white and one is wearing black. And just see if you can correctly count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball to one another. And you may think that you've seen this before, but still see if you can get it correct because you might be surprised. So how many times do the players wearing white pass the ball?
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
There we go.
The correct answer is 16 passes.
16, which I'm sure most
Did you spot the gorilla?
But did you spot the other things?
For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So I'd like to know in the poll, did you miss, which of those did you miss? And you can select more than one, I think. Did you miss the gorilla or the curtain or the person leaving the game? Oh, it might be, okay, maybe you can't select more than one. If you missed one of these, just click one of them that you missed. Just waiting for the results to come through. So I think it's slightly difficult to answer the question with single select, but I think the main point is very few people said none of them. So was that 97% of people clicked one of these things? Okay, so everybody missed at least one of these things. Point being, there's all of this stuff in our environment that we tend to miss because we just don't have the brain power to see it. On the flip side, there are certain things that we will see immediately and not miss. And to bring that to life, I'm going to show you 8 images on screen very quickly, and you just tell me which ones you see. Okay, so pay attention for the images first of all. And then another poll question. Hopefully you can select more than one, but if not, just, I guess, select the one that stood out to you most, if there was more than one. Did you see a boat, a spider, or a house? Or maybe you didn't see any of these three. And there's a poll question here. Just waiting for the results to come through. So hopefully what we will see, well, I don't want to give it away, but one of these is a lot more attention grabbing than the others because of the evolutionary value that it has. And that appears to be the case. Okay. So great. As you can see, of people who at least saw one thing, the vast majority of people saw a spider over the boat. Some people said the house. There actually wasn't a house. That was a trick question. But there was a boat and a spider. Yeah, and the spider much more likely to be seen because it's dangerous, it's a threat, and so we're evolutionarily hardwired to pay attention to it. So from a marketing perspective, there are certain things that we will immediately pay attention to, and that has a big impact on our behavior. Like, for example, you may be aware of this, but there was a cat called Bob who made friends with a homeless busker. And as the busker said, once Bob started hanging around with him, busking all of a sudden picked up. People were taking pictures. It went crazy. People interacted with me differently. The busker wrote a best-selling book, and they made 2 Christmas movies out of it. Really, a big success, a big behavior changing success. Bob was so successful that I asked the big issue if I could use this cover in my book. They said it was fine, but Bob's agent said no. That's how big Bob was. He was a cat with an agent. But the point being, cute things, emotional things, we're hardwired to pay attention to these. So that's why if you see a talking meerkat in an advert, it'll be more successful because we immediately pay attention to cute things because our babies wouldn't have survived if we didn't. We also pay attention to emotion. So, for example, emotional adverts are much more likely to be noticed and remembered than non-emotional ones. It's a very consistent finding. For instance, this moldy Whopper campaign adverts where they showed pictures of the Whopper going moldy, in contrast to McDonald's food, where if you leave it out for months or years, it won't mold because of all the preservatives. This is emotional, A, because it's disgusting. We're hardwired to pay attention to disgust for evolutionary reasons. And B, it's also surprising because you think, why would Burger King put mold in their adverts? And that emotional element made the ad very attention grabbing and memorable. But it also apparently increased sales by 14%. So it was a very viral advert, so to speak. So that's just a very brief introduction to how we have very limited attention spans and how advertisers and so on grab it. You can read more about this in my book Hooked, available in all good bookshops. But just to give you an overview, there was this study where they looked at the least and most viral headlines on a news website. The least viral headlines were very dry and functional, so things like recapping some of the big stories you might have missed. Whereas the most viral headlines used a lot of these techniques that I talk about in my book and that I briefly covered here. So, for example, the top headline, this teen crossed a dangerous highway to play Pokemon Go and then was hit by a car. So that, I know I click on that. That has a story. It has a surprising twist. It's unexpected. It's visualizable. You can almost imagine it in your head. It's emotional. So it has all of these things that grab attention. So that's one part of the puzzle that these platforms and companies use. It is grabbing that, what's called the brain's bouncer. These things we're hardwired to pay attention to. That's why, for example, I put a cute dog on my book. The second piece of the puzzle is that because we're cognitive misers and can't pay careful attention to everything, we can't really think through decisions carefully. And so we have to rely on heuristics or kind of gut feeling. So imagine, as an example, that you're in a foreign city for one night and you're looking for somewhere to eat and you can only find these two restaurants. Would you rather eat at the one on the left or the right? So we'll open up a poll for this now. Rather eat at the one on the left or the right? Just wait for these answers to come in. Now, one of the answers tends to dominate over the other ones, as we'll see. But don't feel bad if you pick the other one. There's a certain personality traits which actually are quite important for not being nudged, as we'll talk about later. So we'll just wait, I think, about 10 seconds for the results to come through and to load. Seems to be about as expected, which is good. It's always good when these things work. My little experiments work. Great. So yeah, as you can see, majority of people pick the one on the left because it is a bias, a heuristic called social proof. So if everyone is doing it, it must be good. So the busy restaurant is popular, you know immediately, therefore it must be good. You don't have to look at loads of reviews or spend lots of time thinking about it. And that is a heuristic, social proof, busy equals good. If you pick the one on the right, about 1 in 4 people pick the one on the right. I would pick the one on the right. For me personally, it's because I'm a disagreeable introvert and I'd rather not be around other people. It looks too busy for me. But this is a point we'll get to later. Well, 2 points. One is that not every nudge works for every person the same. So often companies use personalized nudging. And secondly, being disagreeable can actually protect you a bit from influence, but we'll talk about that later. And so what platforms do is they take these heuristics, these influence techniques, and layer them into their platforms and their messaging to make them more effective. And there's a very masterful or skillful example here, COVID vaccine text, where in just 19 words, they managed to fit at least 6 nudges. Those 19 words being, you have reached the top of the queue and are a priority for getting a free NHS COVID vaccine. So by saying there's a queue, they're using social proof. If it's busy, it must be good, just like the restaurant. By having you reach the top of the queue, this is a commitment nudge where you feel invested. You wouldn't want to lose your place in a queue, would you? By having you at the top and a priority, this is potentially an ego appeal to make you feel special. It's not the front of the queue, it's the top of the queue, so you almost feel kind of above people. Um, by calling you a priority, it's also a scarcity nudge, so you feel like demand is bigger than supply, and that drives an urgency to go and get it. Giving it for free is A, making it as easy as possible, but also maybe using reciprocity, where you're being given something, so you feel kind of obliged to repay the favor. And then having it come from the NHS is what's called a messenger effect, where we're more likely to comply and to follow a message if it comes from someone we like and trust and recognize. So that's a very skillful example. Another example here from booking.com. Now, they've kind of eased off these nudges lately, but they used to use them quite quite a lot, quite vociferously. So, for example, by showing ratings for the hotel room, they're using an authority nudge, so it seems expert and credible and trustworthy. By having real reviews from real people in a very human, relatable language, they're using liking. That's where we're more likely to do something if we kind of feel a relationship with someone or something. Social proof, where they say last booked for your dates 23 hours ago, so you feel like other people are booking it, so it must be popular, it must be good, and also a bit of urgency. You better get it while you still can. There's also a scarcity nudge where they say only one room left on our site. Although I've seen that before, I booked the last room, I went back and it still said it. So take that with a pinch of salt. Reciprocity, they have that big list of green ticks. Here's all the things we're giving you. So you feel like you're getting a good deal and you want to repay the favor by booking. But if you actually look at what they are, I mean, one of those items is toilet. I'd really hope that a toilet came with the room. And then the final nudge, commitment, pay when you stay. So you reserve now without having to pay anything. And that's what's called a foot in the door technique. So it's one small commitment makes you more likely to follow up with the big one. In the same way that car dealerships like it if you do a test drive of a car, because there's no obligation, very easy to do that. You don't feel intimidated. But once you've then done the test drive, you're kind of on the journey then to actually buying the car from them. And then I just wanted to talk about a couple of interesting examples from advertising and marketing and beyond of how this kind of stuff is applied. Hopefully this works. But if I play this jingle, first of all, you probably know exactly who that is. But secondly, you might finish the jingle. There's a certain line that comes to your head. I'm loving it, probably. And this is a very clever example of essentially Pavlovian conditioning, that every time you hear that jingle without the lyrics, your brain auto completes it and you think, I'm loving it. So they, like Pavlov's dog hearing a bell ring, McDonald's have got you to think, I love McDonald's every time you hear that jingle. Very, very clever. One that I love to see in Tesco, sometimes they have, or at least had, yellow signs next to the products which say special purchase. Now, actually, it's completely meaningless, doesn't mean anything, there's no promotion or anything, but it kind of feels like there is. And it also, the color yellow, one study found we associate with discounts, so it feels like it's good value. So it's a very clever way of making you feel like something's on promotion and discounted and good value and gets you to buy it when they haven't actually changed the price at all. And then from politics, there was a campaign that I was aware of, let's say, where they did kind of digital campaign assets where they had kind of pictures of spiders and snakes inside ballot boxes. And there was kind of a superficial message, which was, be careful if you vote for the other candidate, you don't know what you get, a nasty surprise. But actually, it was working on a subconscious level to associate, again through conditioning, fear with voting. It was kind of to gently dissuade the other candidate's supporters from voting. So sneaky, but and unethical, of course, but impressive on a psychological perspective. So there's all of this stuff happening to us constantly that we're not necessarily aware of. And politicians do it a lot as well. So I'll give you a few examples. One is with digital ID. Now, whatever you think about it, like it or loathe it, the techniques that they're using to get people to accept it are quite genius. One, of course, is, which I'll talk about in a bit, the foot in the door technique again. So they're kind of incrementally introducing it. So first you have to prove your age for adult content. Soon you're going to have to prove your age to use social media because it will be banned for under 16s. So they're just kind of gently introducing it without fully bringing it in, because people would rebel if they did that. But secondly, they also are using wish fulfillment. So every time there's something that people care about in the news, Tony Blair or whoever kind of pops up and says that an ID card could be the solution to this. So if people care about vaccines, they say an ID card can be used to prove a vaccination status. Then if the national conversation moves to immigration, they say that ID cards can be used to prevent illegal immigration. So what they're doing is, for our book, we interviewed an expert in propaganda, and he said something that really stuck with me, which is that successful messaging or propaganda doesn't make you want something. It finds out what you already want and then sells it to you. And you see this a lot with policies, especially ID card. They're tapping into what people want to sell them this as a solution. Another thing they often do is what's called the door in the face technique, where they say something outlandish and painful so that when they do what they actually were going to do, it feels less painful. So there were all these news stories coming out that capital gains tax would go up to 40%. And in the end, it only went up to 20%, I think. And so people actually, even though it had gone up, they felt relieved. Trump uses this technique a lot. He says he's going to take Greenland, and then in the end, he gets what he wants, which is like a compromise. But that's probably what he wanted all along. So he often asks for very outlandish things so that he can be negotiated down to what he actually wants. And then they also use incrementalism, again, the foot in the door technique, but they won't just bring out an unpopular policy or any policy all at once, but rather gradually lead up to it. So you see this with driving, for example. You had the congestion charge, then the low emission zone, then ULEZ, and then these kind of slowly creeping out further and further outside London and then to other cities. If they just kind of introduced a ban on cars immediately, people would rebel. But if they kind of creep up to it, it's more acceptable. So, and another technique you often see in politics is concreteness. People don't deal very well with abstract concepts. We prefer things to be simple and visual and relatable. So a good example is hands, face, space, where these are very simple, short words accompanied by images, but also they're concrete words. So instead of saying hygiene, which is an abstract concept, they've said hands, which are a tangible thing, right? Same, instead of social distancing, which is kind of meaningless, they said space, which is a tangible concept. Again, Trump does this very skillfully. For example, rather than outlining a complex, abstract immigration policy, he talked about building a wall, because a wall is literally a concrete, visual, real thing. So it's a lot easier and a lot more persuasive. Tech platforms use these techniques as well, of course, a lot. So I'll just give you a few examples. One, the sunk cost fallacy. So this is that investment commitment nudge again, which Snapchat and other companies, Duolingo as well, do with streaks. So you feel like you're committed and invested in your streak. And so you don't want to lose it. And that keeps you coming back, because we have this innate aversion to losing things. It's called loss aversion. Randomized reward schemes might be where you log into a game, like a Roblox game or something, and there's a mystery box every day or every week, and you don't know what's going to be in it. Sometimes it's a good prize, sometimes it's a bad prize, or kind of worthless prize. That's not a bug, but a feature, because when we can't figure something out, that's what makes it addictive. So if it sometimes is one thing and sometimes another, that actually keeps you coming back because you can't figure out the pattern. We've seen that there's research with rats where if they press a button and sometimes they get injected with cocaine or whatever it is, and sometimes they don't, that's a lot more addictive if it's random rather than if they always get injected with it every time they press it. Social media platforms, I think, also use this to a certain extent, like LinkedIn. You get notifications on LinkedIn. It says you have 20 notifications, and you look, and some of them are good. Some of them are comments from someone you know, or a viable prospect or something. But some of them are just kind of pointless nonsense that you don't need to see. again, I think that's a feature, not a bug, because it's a randomized reward scheme that makes it more addictive or habit forming, shall we say. And then games also do, for example, use completion bias, where you feel like you want to, as Pokemon said, you got to catch them all. It's particularly persuasive for kids who have this desire to collect things and to sort them into categories. So games like Adopt Me, where you get different types of pets and things, is using completion bias. So platforms are using loads of these techniques. I've only really touched the surface there, but also, if you go into Twitter or something, sometimes it's hard to see the clock in the corner. That's an old trick from casinos where if you can't tell the passing of time, you stay there for longer. Infinite refresh, infinite scroll and pull to refresh. These are all things which stop you from being aware of time and just keep you hooked there. So the platforms are using these techniques, but also the messaging as well uses certain things to make it go viral and to be behaviorally engaging. There was a very interesting study of Twitter, which essentially found three things predict whether something will go viral on Twitter or not. One is negativity bias, so bad news sells. Second is causal agreement framing, so essentially acting like you have the answer to the problem. And then the last is value threat framing. So this is feeling like you're under attack from the other camp. So essentially, if it's negative, acts like it has the answer to a problem and makes you feel like you're under threat, is more likely to go viral, on Twitter at least. Or it's different for different platforms. And also, as I said, tech platforms personalize these nudges because not every nudge works for every person the same. I did a study for a big submarine sandwich brand, I won't say which one, and we tested certain nudges, like for example, having more descriptive language of the item. So rather than cookie, say grandma's homemade cookie, that kind of thing. We found that it worked, but only for people who are open to experiences. So this is kind of creative, thoughtful people. They responded well to descriptive language, but other people, it had no effect. So the nudges that I use, it really depends on the audience. Like not everyone goes to the busy restaurant, some people prefer the quiet. And so what these platforms do is they build these predictive models based on our data footprints. Like for example, Spotify can predict your personality from the music you listen to. Um, extroverts listen to funky, upbeat music, whereas introverts listen to gothic and emo and punk and stuff like that. And these, in theory, can be quite predictive. So a Facebook algorithm was able to, on average, predict people's personality better than could a family member, a friend, someone you live with, or someone you work with. The only person who knows you better is your spouse, unless the algorithm has about 300 or more of your Facebook likes. Then, on average, it's even more accurate than your spouse. So here's a kind of worked example from my Instagram, just a couple of illustrations of how these algorithms work. So if you look at my photos, they're just me. I don't really have photos with other people. And also, I'm not smiling in any of my pictures. So you can take from that I'm quite introverted, maybe disagreeable and aloof. I also post pictures of work and objects, which would again suggest I'm not super social. Maybe I'm kind of aloof and also conscientious or organized. So that's what these platforms do, is they can draw a whole load of psychological insight from you based on these data points, and then use that for targeted messaging. So, for example, I found some psychological personas for a vitamins and supplements brands and created different messaging for them. So, for lifters, these are kind of weightlifters. It's much more about power and more kind of power focused aesthetics. Whereas for bohemians, it's more about nature and well-being, and they're more likely to be nudged by unity appeals, so being part of a tribe, that kind of thing. And AI can make this messaging now at scale quite effectively. One study found that 61% were significantly persuasive, which is higher than chance. Chance would be 50%. But this study came out a few years ago. It was using ChatGPT 3 or something. So it's advanced a long way since then. So all of this personalized nudging can be done very easily and effectively now. And that's to say nothing of the technology coming down the pipe, like Elon Musk wants to connect all of our brains to the internet. Seems like a terrible idea to me. What do I know? But there's this technology can effectively, in the future, read and even change our minds directly at the source. And there's an interesting point there when it comes to technology, is that the medium is the message, and we don't just use technology, but maybe it uses us, to the point where even the philosopher Nietzsche said that when he bought a new typewriter, it changed what he wrote and how he wrote, because it was so kind of mechanistic. And so the technology platforms might actually be changing us psychologically. There's research as well with tool use showing that essentially when a monkey uses, and indeed a human, of course, but when a monkey uses a tool to extend its like reach, when you look at its brain, essentially you can see that the tool has become part of itself. And whereas things that used to be put only within arm's reach activated the arm part of the brain, when they hold the tool, actually now within that whole extended reach, it activates the same part of the brain. So it almost becomes part of the self. And technology, of course, is no exception. It's having quite profound effects on us, perhaps. Some researchers suggest we're outsourcing our thinking to what they call the brain in the pocket, to the point where, as the chart on the left shows, people who use search engine on their phone more often actually end up putting less thoughts into answering questions for themselves, because they're outsourcing their thinking. And then we're seeing on a wider scale all sorts of research kind of backing this up, but one that came out recently found an increasing prevalence of cognitive deficits among what you call normal people, non-clinical people, particularly among younger people aged 18 to 39. So we don't know this is technology, right? But it almost certainly is when we look at the timing. It's making people more distractible, putting less thought into themselves, more emotionally reactive, etc. So it's having quite a profound effect on us. And there's also something called the Proteus effect, where it used to be that people tried to make their avatars match their in real life selves. Whereas now, more recently, what we're seeing is people trying to make their real life selves match their avatars. And that's what's called the Proteus effect, where they found that if you play a video game with a character who is confident, for example, people become a bit more confident in real life. And this is how you get people, identifying as cats or whatever else these days. Because we take on that digital self. However, there are things we can do about this, and we can kind of break technology's influence on us. And this is something I've been working on in my personal life quite a bit. And I want to share 5 quite powerful tips that I've found. One is what I call fire breaks. So that's obviously stopping using the device. Now, that sounds like a big thing to stop using it forever. You don't have to stop using it forever if you can just take a fire break. So even just one day. So what I've found, for example, is if I switch my phone off and put it in the car and leave it just for one day for a Saturday, my usage of the phone is less for the rest of the week. So that's a fire break. If you can just get away from it for a bit, it has a sustained, lasting impact. Secondly, make it less interesting. So obviously turn off notifications and mute notifications. There was a study which found that muting notifications reduced ADHD symptoms among a non-clinical sample. So it really has a big effect. But also put your phone on grayscale, for instance, to make it less interesting. Treat it like a breakup. There's 2 points to this. A lot of people use their phone for socializing and talking to people they love and care about. And in that way, the medium is the message. You kind of bond with your phone even. So try and talk to people you care about in person. Try to mediate it away from the device. But also, how to put this, try not to watch adult content on a device, because you are kind of romantically bonding with the device itself every time you do that. And so you're never going to kind of break up with it while you still kind of love your device, Make it difficult to use. So this is about screen time apps and screen time controls. There are some really good apps out there which are hard to bypass, where you have to, for example, fill in a puzzle or wait 10 minutes before you can bypass the screen time blocks. And then finally, find your deepest motivation. So I did a study for people quitting smoking once, and it's quite consistent that when people finally quit and have their last cigarette, they feel disgust at cigarettes, that there's a disgust emotional motivation. So it's not enough just to kind of want to use your device less and know you should. You need to really find like what's a really deep inner emotional reason for doing it, and then hold on to that. So there's some tips for technology specifically, but just zooming out as well. More broadly, I want to end on some tips on how to not get influenced and nudged in general, with the advertisers and the platforms and maybe even people at work or in your life who are trying to influence you. And so, as I said, I co-wrote a book recently about this, about how to free your mind and not get influenced. And I did about 2 years of research, reading books on brainwashing and so on, but I also joined a few cults, which I can't really talk about because they're very litigious. Probably read between the lines. But I really learnt in the flesh how these techniques are used. So I went along to this one, for example, and one very interesting thing they did was they kept getting my name wrong. So they said, "Hello, Adam," or is it Patrick? It's Patrick. It's always been Patrick. I don't know why they said that. And then they misspelled my name twice, which I don't think I have an uncommon name. But I think what they were doing was trying to unseat my ego and my sense of self. So another kind of cult that I went to, they took away my name and gave me a number, which had a similar effect. So I learned all of these techniques, and we wrote it into the book. But I want to give you just some key principles to bear in mind for not getting nudged. Which, by the way, you can read at this free PDF on my website, which outlines how these techniques are kind of used to influence you, like the incrementalism point that I talked about earlier. Often it goes in small stages. So when I went to that cult, I just went to the website. It was supposed to be an hour free thing. I turn up, they say it's 4 hours. I have to pay. I have to come back every weekend. So it builds up slowly. But if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can check out the free white paper there. But as I said, I want to leave you with a few principles for how to not get nudged or influenced if you don't want to be. The first is to get immunity. So what I mean by this is that you can, to a certain extent, learn these techniques, and if you know them and recognize them, then you're less likely to be influenced by them. So there are studies, for example, showing that if you acquaint yourself with these techniques, you're, for example, in one study, up to 13 percentage points less likely to have your opinion changed. And this comes from psychological immunity, or inoculation, it's called. So phishing games do this, for example, where your workplace might send you an email and you have to spot the things so that you're aware that it's someone trying to phish you or get information from you. As a computer security expert I spoke to said, it's better to get scammed for £10 and learn how it works than it is to get scammed for £10,000. The next one is to stand your ground. And this is about, we talked about incrementalism, right? These things often go in small steps. And so it's important to kind of essentially say no. And there was this great book on brainwashing that I read, which said the only dogs that Pavlov couldn't condition were those who didn't listen to the bell in the first place, which just ignored it in the first place. Likewise, there's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous that if you hang around in a barber's, sooner or later you're going to get your hair cut. So try not to hang around in a barber's. Just don't even engage at all. So try to use social media less, watch the news less, whatever it might be. Then you're less likely to be influenced. The next one is get it in writing. We are very visual creatures. We've had eyes for a lot longer in our evolutionary history than we've had language. And so when we see something, well, there's something called the picture superiority effect, where images are more quickly recognized than words. They are more emotionally engaging, and they're also more believable. An image is 1,000 words. There's studies showing that you can show people an image, and then later, if you tell them it was fake, it was not true, they still believe it. Their attitudes were still changed. Quite a worrying thing in the age of AI, of course. And people often just believe things that they see on a screen or in an image or TV. Like there was this Panorama April Fool's show where they had spaghetti trees. And this was, I think, in the 40s or 50s. And people phoned in saying, how can I grow my own spaghetti tree? Not realizing it was an April Fool's joke. So try to get things in writing. If you have an agreement or something, get it in writing so you can read it, think about it. Try to get your information through text rather than image, and especially video. There was a study which they found people who watch a kind of CNN or cable news type information where you have the person talking, the information, and then there's stuff scrolling along the bottom as well, they're much more likely to have their attitudes changed by that because there's so much information there that your ability to digest it properly gets overwhelmed. And so you're more likely to take it on board. The next principle is not to overthink it. And there's a very interesting idea here that we tend to think if you're smart, intelligent, it can protect you from believing silly things or from being manipulated. Actually, there is some research which suggests the opposite is true, and that maybe IQ makes people more likely to be influenced by things. And there are case studies and anecdotes as well. For example, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, by most measures, a very intelligent man, he believed in fairies and psychics and things like that. And the reason intelligence can actually make you vulnerable is, first of all, confidence. You think you wouldn't get manipulated, you're too smart, and that ironically makes you vulnerable to it. Humility is very, very protective against manipulation. If you think you can't be manipulated, you're more likely to be. But also, intelligent people can do motivated reasoning. In other words, they're much better at explaining and coming up with justifications for why they think what they think. Now, obviously, I'm not saying be stupid. It's very good to be smart and think things through. But the solution here is to listen to your gut. And there are studies showing that if you meditate, you're less likely to be manipulated. If you listen to your gut and write down and then reason what your gut is saying and why that's important. So it's that mix of intuition and rationality. Doctors make better decisions when they do that. Investors make better decisions. So it's about kind of listening to your gut and not kind of being super detached from emotion and living in this entirely intellectual space. Watch out for the blip is about the fact that we are more likely to be manipulated when our defenses are down. So when you're going through a blip. Now, a blip can happen on a small scale. So if you're tired or hungry, for example, or if you've been kind of bamboozled by someone, you're more likely to be influenced. If you feel under pressure or a bit confused, you're more likely to just go with the flow. It can happen on a medium scale, where, for example, people are more likely to join a cult or a multi-level marketing scheme if they've just been through a divorce, or if army spouses are apparently more likely to do multi-level marketing schemes because they're always moving around. So they're always kind of in a bit of disarray in their life. And it also happens on a large scale. There's a book called The Shock Doctrine, which is about how people or societies are more likely to take up a new political agenda if they've just been through a pandemic or a war or a financial crash. So the point here is, there's another from Alcoholics Anonymous, an acronym called HALT, HALT. So basically, you're going to make a decision. Make sure you don't do it when you're hungry, anxious, lonely, or tired. Because if you're under pressure or tired or at the end of the day, you're more likely to do something emotional and go along with the flow. Kind of related to this is the importance of standing for something so you don't fall for anything. So, for example, if you're going shopping, if you don't have a shopping list in advance, you're more likely to impulse buy. And of course, this happens on a wider scale where if people don't kind of commit to an ideology or religion or a hobby or something, they're more likely to fall for ideological movements. So the point here is to stand for something, lest you fall for anything. It's essentially, if you have an anchor, you're less likely to get manipulated. And then one last final point to end on. If you look at these two lines, and I were to ask you which one is longer, well, you probably know that they're the same length rationally, right? But you can't unsee the illusion that the bottom one looks longer. And so the point here is that despite everything I've said, you can't really not be manipulated. Our brains just don't work that way. We can't think through everything rationally, carefully. We have to rely on shortcuts or we'd never get anything done. So you can't not be manipulated, but you can choose your manipulation or you can choose your illusion. And I think there's something very powerful in that, right? You're always going to be a product of your environment, of the information you read. You tune into what you turn into, but you can choose that environment. You can craft what influences you. And I think that's actually ultimately very powerful. So on social media, you could follow people who make your life worse, or you can follow people who make your life better and tell you how to be healthier, wealthier, and so on. So ultimately, everyone else is trying to brainwash you. So why not brainwash yourself and do it for the better? Thank you. Okay, so some interesting questions here. What concerns me is how devices pick up on private verbal conversations and then shares adverts based on what it's heard talking about. For example, we had a very random conversation about a well-known castle in Germany. Moments later, that castle featured in an advert in a well-known social media platform. So I don't have any kind of insider knowledge that that's definitely happening. And if you ask these platforms, they would say it's not, and that it's obviously a privacy violation and so on. What they tend to say is that one of two things can be happening here, and probably both. One is that it's a spotlight effect, where we pay attention to something that's already on our mind. And so you're probably bombarded with hundreds of adverts that you just don't pay any attention to. But then you see one for something that you were talking about recently, and you will notice that because it's at the front of your mind. So it could be that, and it could also be called probabilistic modeling. So they know that you live in a certain area, you have a certain wealth bracket, certain education bracket, you are more likely to be interested in that castle in Germany. And so it's like probabilistically predicting that you would talk about it, and it's kind of a coincidence. Um, Also, you talked about it, but maybe also you Googled something previously, for example, castles or Germany or something that you forgot about. So it could be that too. Do you have ethical qualms about the work you do to influence people as a psychologist? Yes. Yes. I mean, yes, obviously. What I would say is that you can't not influence people. Every form of communication is designed to influence. Um, what you can do is do it ethically, though. And for me, ethics is about three things. First of all, empathy, which is I wouldn't use fear or social shaming or ostracizing or anything that would make people feel bad. Secondly, autonomy, so letting people opt out. Don't try and make them do things they don't want to do. And if you try and nudge them and they say no, that's that. And then don't be creepy. So be very, very transparent and upfront about what you're doing. What are your top tips to identify if something is genuine or a scam? Um, that's a tricky one because, like I said, both the genuine people and the scam people are using the same techniques. I guess it depends on the source that you're going to be looking for certain authoritative cues, like what's the URL? Is it an authoritative URL, for example? But ultimately, listen to your gut and take time. So I actually got pulled into a scam recently for a flight, kind of a scam for a site selling website selling flights. They upsold me on stuff I didn't need, and it's because they put me under pressure. It's a flight. You don't want your flight to go. You want your seats and everything. So if you feel like you're under pressure, if you feel like something's not right, that's when it probably is a scam. So just listen to your gut. How can we teach our children to protect themselves or be discerning? That's again a very big question. I think the principles apply again. So get immunity. So reading books about these principles helps, but also raising your level of consciousness. I know that sounds a bit kooky, but things like mindfulness, getting outdoors and exercise, these things help a lot. And also, again, if you're going to hang around in a barber, sooner or later you get your hair cut. So I think it is quite important to reduce your exposure, so less social media, less screens, etc. What are your thoughts on the proposed social media ban for under 16s? So I have obviously I mean, this is my biased opinion. I feel a bit mixed. On the one hand, I don't think kids, or probably even adults, to be honest, should be using social media. It's kind of hard to see what the benefits are at the minute. What the benefits are, and especially for teens. And you're seeing all this stuff. I mean, the Anxious Generation book says it a lot more eloquently than I will, but it's having a big negative effect on people, especially young people. On the other hand, I can't help but feel like it's a stepping stone to more kind of control. and restrictions from the government, which I'm very much against. So I feel mixed. Um, it would be interesting to hear what concerns you have for the future that relate to this topic. Um, so that's something I could talk about a lot. Obviously, one thing I'll try and say this in a way that doesn't sound kooky. Something I'm really interested in is something called egregores. So that's essentially a kooky way of saying infodemics is another way of saying it. But technology, I think, is opening people up to be easily possessed by ideas. So a benign example of this could be TikTok trends. Way back in the medieval past, we had dancing plagues. We have dancing plagues today, but they're just kind of mediated by TikTok. You know, people doing goofy dances all together, things going viral, ideas going viral, and then it feels like every so often, every other month, there's some kind of mass hysteria that people are really worked up and upset about, and I think that's via technology. So yeah, I think the main thing to look towards that I'm worried about is masses of people being taken over quite quickly by ideas, essentially, and ideologies. What apps do you recommend to lock down socials? If I Google them, we get loads of adverts. So I use, depends what you want. My wife uses Opal, which I think is the best one. It has, it gives you puzzles and things and makes you wait. So it really quite psychologically optimized. Um, what I do personally is my wife has my screen time password, so I can't bypass it that without kind of going to and groveling. That is probably what I would recommend is the best because whatever app you install, you can, just delete it at the end of the day, can't you? X and Facebook are now as bad as each other in terms of feeding you the rubbish that would trigger. Neither platform tends to show me posts from friends or people I follow. It's infuriating and completely against the principle of what they were originally intended. Yeah, I mean they're designed for emotional engagement, and that tends to be uh, bilious stuff because we pay attention to negativity. Really, I've quit social media apps and feel much better overall. Rage baiting is very common. Yeah, and also on Twitter, vague posting it drives me mad. Where they say something like. Or everyone needs to know this without saying what it is. It's just the kind of the brain equivalent of McDonald's. No offense to McDonald's, everything in moderation, but it's just kind of empty, addictive stuff. Yeah, and people getting sucked into social media, even my mom and grandma. Yeah, I was on holiday recently, like beautiful location, sunny beach, white sand. Everyone's on their phone. What's the point even of being there? Yeah, I think it's quite sad. How do you feel about AI being used to bait people into things? I mean, I, I can't help but respect the method. Quite sophisticated, but I think people have to become more savvy about this stuff and recognize it when they see it. Vague posting, for example, recognize if someone's doing something to just get you to engage and not actually giving you any value, and then like that dog that didn't respond to the bell, you just have to not pay attention to it. You have to pass it by. It's a bit like the episode of The Simpsons, the Halloween ones, where all the billboards come to life, and the only way to kill them is to stop looking. I think with a lot of these techniques, the best thing to do is just to ignore it. So there's 1 minute to go. I hope that was useful, instructive, and that it really helped you also, avoid these mind games and protect your brain and avoid influence if you want to. So without further ado, I think thank you, and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions.